Hello and welcome back to another episode of Form Check Friday, or whatever day this comes out on. We are going to get right into it. Now, if you're interested in being featured on Form Check Friday, go ahead and click the video I'm going to put up on the screen right now, and go ahead and watch through that for the submission guidelines, or just check out the description box below. We have the email in there. Send it off. Get critiqued. It's all a good time. All right, now let's dive into it. So we're going to pick up where we left off with Mr. Matt's squat. Now, this is a set of 315 for 6. He says he's been training for about 2 years, and that he's not necessarily looking to compete, and that his biggest issue is that he finds himself getting forward in the bottom. He gets a little bit on his toes. So one of the biggest things I'm noticing here is that I think our stance is maybe a little bit wide. So what we're seeing at the bottom is we're seeing the knees sort of collapse. We're seeing the feet collapse a little bit. And a lot of times when that happens, the hips shoot up, and then we feel our upper back getting kind of pitched forward by the weight. So I think there's a number of those things happening. And I think the biggest thing I'd probably try to address this is to move the stance in a little bit. I think it's going to help you get a little bit tighter in the bottom. It's probably going to take some learning and some getting used to. It may not feel super comfortable immediately, but I do think it's going to help with a lot of the issues I'm seeing here. Now, the next thing is potentially put more pressure on your forefoot. Put more pressure through those big toes. One thing that happens when we work on staying really, really far back is as soon as we hit the bottom, we shift forward and then we shift back. And that's when we see that sort of squat morning pattern. We see the hips shoot up, like I was saying. But if we can keep pressure through that forefoot all the way down and all the way back up, we're going to help keep those knees forward. We're going to help stay in the quads a little bit, stay in the quads as it were. And that can help smooth out some of those issues in terms of like the frontal plane travel in the bottom position of the squat. So hopefully some of those things help you, Matt, and best of luck with it. Now we have Eva doing some squats here as well. And I actually believe this is just a single. But she says that she's finding her squat not improving. Didn't give a whole lot more context than that, but she says that she lives in Switzerland. She's a beginner powerlifter, really enjoys the learning process, and puts a lot into what she does. So let's take a look here. So first things first, unrack, walk out, look quite solid to me. It's really unfortunate that this is kind of in the way here because that's going to obscure a lot of our view. Now, I think we're probably pretty good on depth there, but we are seeing a fair bit of knee cave here. We're seeing you kind of roll onto the inside of your foot as you get into the bottom. So if we just slow this down for a second, I think this often helps. So if we slow this down, watch how we get almost into the bottom, and then just before we get to depth, we kind of collapse inwards. Right there. So we hit the bottom, the knees roll in a little bit, we roll to the insides of the feet, and then, excuse me, see a little bit of a sticking point as we push the knees back out into position. So this might also be a similar case where I would recommend trying a bit of a narrower stance, trying to keep some tension through those quads and allow yourself to come forward a little bit on the way down. And depth does look like it's maybe a little bit on the line. So let's make sure we're getting good solid depth on every rep. Now, with your squat not progressing, that's usually when I would look at programming. So I would look at, okay, how many times a week are we squatting? What's our intensity look like? Are we doing enough volume? Are we getting enough squat stress, or maybe too much squat stress? So if you have a coach, I would discuss that with him or her. And I think that would be probably a really good way to address that lack of progress. Technique doesn't look like it's what's specifically holding you back, but I would definitely, like I said, have those conversations with yourself if you're doing your own programming, or whoever else might be doing your programming for you. All right, now we're going to get on to our third submission of the day. This is from Daniel. Now, Daniel says this is his first year powerlifting, 16 years old, and he's looking for basically anything that could help. So let's dive in from the start. So decent little setup here. I think we could take an extra second to make sure we've got everything nice and tight before we unrack, but it looks like we got some of the basics down, right? We're trying to use the leg drive to push the chest up and back. Looks like we're trying to set up on those traps, keep the shoulder blades nice and tight. Unrack, pretty loose, right? We lose those shoulders forward quite a bit from the unrack. And then as we come out, you can see we're adjusting the feet. Now, what should be the case is that none of this moves once you've unracked the weight. I want you to be so tight through your quads. I want your feet to be so firmly planted, your back to be so tight and rigid, and your chest to be driven up so far that when you unrack the weight, nothing else moves. Now, we've got this kind of interesting, really jolty leg drive, which tells me that we're trying to skip this bottom part of the range of motion, right? If we're going to do the sort of sink and heave style of benching, we need more continuous leg drive throughout. We need to allow that bar to sink in. We need to let it settle. And then we need to use a concentrated effort of pushing the leg drive and then following the momentum with the upper body. The other school of benching, or school of leg drive specifically, would be we have very constant tension all the time, a nice light touch, almost like you're just touching the fabric of your t-shirt, and a lot of control out of the bottom. Whereas here, we have not a lot of control. So if we're gonna sink and heave, our leg drive is early. And if we're going to be a sort of light touch bencher, then we need a lot more control descending and decelerating that bar before it gets to the chest. And here you can see we press it back up. This shoulder comes way far forward. The bar tilts over here. So it just tells me we're probably pushing into RPEs and intensities we probably don't need to be training at right now if we're still trying to like work on just figuring out how the lift works. Now, I'm not saying don't push yourself, but this is like a 9.5, maybe even 10 RPE. So take your time, practice, worry about trying to get nice, smooth, consistent, repeatable movement. Like we want reps to look the same throughout a set. We want sets to look the same throughout a workout. And we want those workouts, I guess, to kind of look the same throughout a given block of training. So we build consistency in the motor pattern, at least to a point, right? Variation's not a bad thing, but we do want more consistency than this. I did also want to just take a second to say good on you for lifting at 16. I think it's fantastic. I think even if you have things to learn and improve on, and things to, kind of clean up with your bench press, I think it's fantastic that you're interested in lifting, and I fully recommend you continue it because, I wish I would have been lifting when I was 16. So hopefully that helps, and stick with it, buddy. Next up, we have Crystal. She's doing some deadlifts. She says her deadlift's not progressing as well as her other lifts. She's been lifting for 5 years now, recently switched from sumo to conventional, which I think is backwards, right? Aren't you just supposed to switch to sumo? Anyways, her current max is 335, videos 285 for 4, and she's working on keeping her lats tight, pushing through the floor, and she says she has issues losing tension in the back. So the biggest thing I'm noticing here is, first off, these handles are really great. This looks like a very nice, very organized, awesome setup here, and a fireplace too. Wonderful. Where's our start position? Right here. Okay. So it looks like we're a little bit kind of dumped under in the pelvis there. And one of the things I might try to deal with that is widening your stance and your grip a little bit. So sometimes, like if your belt's running into your quads, it doesn't really allow us to get into as good a start position. So we might be able to get a little bit more of a flat back, which is going to mean we start with a more neutral sort of range back, and can help with that sensation of like, oh, I feel like I'm losing my back. I'm, kind of losing my lats. So if you widen things up a little bit, it might allow you to get into a better position to start with. And the other thing I would probably do is don't touch and go. Right here, we're barely letting it stop on the floor, and I would recommend you let it come to a complete dead stop, like that kind of a dead stop on the floor every time, so that we can get really good at getting into the start position, so we can get really good at breaking the bar from the floor from a dead stop, exactly like we will in competition, right? So we want to work on that skill component of getting the bar off the floor, not necessarily just getting the reps in. Now, if for some reason you've been programmed touch and go deadlifts, just disregard that. But if these are your competition deadlifts, we should be at a dead stop every single rep. Hopefully that helps you, Crystal. Next, we have Soren. Soren's doing some squats here, 165 kilos for 5 at RPE 9. He says he's 25, he's been lifting for a few years and might like to compete in the future. So let's take a look. Unrack, walkout looked pretty solid there. Setup, nothing wrong with that. All right, now if we're looking to compete, the first thing I'm seeing here is we're a little shy on depth. So right now we've got the hip crease up here, bottom of the knee down here. This angle is probably a bit unforgiving on depth, but it does look like you're a little high. So first things first, get that depth sorted. Now, when you do get that depth sorted, I think that's going to exaggerate some of the things we're seeing here, which is that little bit of knee cave and a little bit of the hips shooting up. So a couple things we can try. Number one, maybe narrow that stance a little bit. I'm going to sound like a broken record on squats today. Sorry, y'all. Narrow that stance a little bit. Try to keep those knees forward out of the hole so we can stay in the quads and maintain that torso angle, not seeing the hips shoot up. But first and foremost, get to depth, figure out what depth feels like, because that may present a whole new set of issues or patterns or things to tackle and correct, because the difference of a marginally high squat versus a fully to depth squat is quite big in terms of how it feels, how you perform, and all those kinds of things. So it's definitely worth taking some time practicing a little bit better depth and then sort of reassessing the squat from there. But my feeling is that we're going to see a lot of those same patterns of knees caving, hips shooting up. So a bit of a narrower stance, keeping those knees forward out of the bottom. Torso angle looks great. Upper back tension looks great. So good start, but I think there are some things to work on. So best of luck with that. And hopefully we do see you make it onto the platform. Now we have Roman. Roman is doing some bench press here, and Roman says this is his worst lift. He's been making some progress throughout this government-mandated timeout, he calls it. 245 for top single after about 5 attempts at 255. He says he's also 16 years old, much like Daniel, who is benching. And he's about 163 pounds. So I'm going to let this play through one more time, but if anybody has any tips or tricks, anything they would recommend to Roman to help him improve the efficiency of his lift, I want you to go ahead and drop that in the comments below. Also, if you have any questions for me about anything I discussed throughout this, or any counterpoints or things that you think I missed, go ahead and leave those in the comments below, and we will address Roman's bench press first thing in the next video. So make sure you hit that subscribe button to stay tuned, and we will see you then. Bye-bye, everybody.